Good evening, primetime partiers. It's primetime party time. Welcome back to our hour of all things media and entertainment, live on the air at 9 p.m. at ptptshow.com and on your time, wherever you stream podcasts. Tonight, we are time traveling back across the pond to binge watch the British comedy classic, Fawlty Towers. For this edition of Primetime Abroad, we're going to look back on how this landmark comedy has influenced shows originating inside and outside of the UK. It's good to note that this was one of John Cleese's first projects after Monty Python's Flying Circus. So, for all those Monty Python fans that haven't watched this is a gem. This is definitely one of my favorite shows from childhood. Which says a lot.
You know, as not a Monty Python fan originally, I've learned a lot about Monty Python, about John Cleese's Monty Python career, and of course the show Fawlty Towers, which we'll get to in just a second. Tracy, did you have a toast and or a roast this week?
Oh yeah, for the toasts and roast. My toast for this week, or as it should. I shouldn't say toast because I am talking about another breakfast item. I actually haven't fully tried it yet, but I did eye it. But I was having a bit of a meh day, and I got this Pokemon cereal.
They have Pokemon cereal?
They do.
What?
And I really committed because they only had a family size, so I hope it's good. So it basically looks though like it's Crunch Berries with, Pikachu-shaped Lucky Charm marshmallows. So I don't really feel like you can go wrong. Obviously, it's a dessert cereal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't start my day this way, or else I don't know how I would be. It just seems unnatural. But like, I really like sugary cereal at night. I feel like it's correct. So yeah, that's my main toast. Though I also started watching Demon Slayer, the anime. And it is quite good. It's very interesting because it's like the art is very like high def, and I'll have to fact check it, but the voice actor for the main character sounds very similar to the voice actor who does the English dub for My Hero Academia. So I'm like, you guys are either the same person or just have some really similar like voice inflections, because when they get a little bit like anxiety, it sounds very similar, but that could just be a style. So,
it could also be the same person.
It could also be the same person, because this does happen a lot when I watch animes where I'm like, this person sounds kind of like, especially for the English dub, you kind of feel like this is the same person, but then you second guess yourself. You're like, it can't be. And then you're like, no, it was. It was the same person. A lot of them stay in similar shows. So, yeah, I'll have to look into that. But so far, I'm a fan. It's
good. Don't have to ask you what it's about, right? It's Demon Slayers.
It's really funny because we've also been in, we're building up to an Inuyasha episode later in this year. And it's definitely supposed to take place in a similar time zone. Like, they don't, like Inuyasha specifically says like they're in the Warring States period. This time, they don't really say anything, but they're in like traditional clothing and they are slaying demons. And in Inuyasha, they have like those demon slayer tribes. And this is kind of one of those. So you're like, in this show, they call it the Demon Slayer Corps.
Okay.
So I'm like, it's kind of cool because it's kind of like looking at, in Inuyasha, you're kind of like, very kind of specifically somewhat like sympathetic for the demons because Inuyasha and Sesshomaru are like main characters. But in this show, it's very much like, they are very much more the enemy, except for what happens in the first episode. That is kind of the main premise, is that his family is like slaughtered by like this super demon. And then but his sister, apparently like the demon blood was close to her wounds. So she's kind of like become one, but she weirdly just, instead of like attacking, just because I guess it's supposed to be like after they fight, they need to like feed on humans to get their energy back, kind of like vampires, but she just sleeps, like full on sleeps for like a month. So she's just napping. She has like a little like mouth guard basically to keep her from biting. But yeah, so there's like a story there. I'm very shallow in the episode count. So
Okay.
I'm sure people who have watched the show more thoroughly are like, you're in for it. You're going to find those
You're gonna
twists
slay some
and turns.
demons.
Yeah, because they definitely have like set out things where it's like, ooh, your sword turned a different color. And I'm like, are they going to end up being like quarter demon or something? This always happens. I watch so many shows. Like, it's a problem.
The tropes of like demon slayer animes.
Yeah, like I start with Yu Yu Hakusho, and then I just like
They slay
go
demons
into
in that one?
Inuyasha. Now I'm here. Like I was started to watch Hunter x Hunter, which I think is also somewhat similar, but I watched like one episode and I was like, I'm gonna get into that. But then I another toast is like my cousin turned 18, which was fun, and I gave her a yukata, which is like a traditional summer kimono, so that she'd have her own. And like one of her friends was like, this is what they wear in the Demon Slayer anime. And then one of her other friends retorted, like, no, that's just because you're watching something in a certain time period. It's not only in that anime. I was like, oh, the new generation. I love it. So quick. But yeah, so mostly toasts this week. My main roast is just like, I get very upset when I deal with incompetence. That is my main plague. So like I have to, without getting too into it, I've just had to make a lot of phone calls to do some adult things. And there's just people who don't answer their emails on time or correctly, or just don't give clear instructions. And from a work perspective, I just get very annoyed because I'm like, if I acted like you, I just wouldn't have a job.
Yeah, that's always the worst for sure.
And then I'm like, and you're in an industry that makes way more money. What's going on?
There is real pain in that.
There's some pain in that. You're just like, wait, what? There are not good standards everywhere.
Oh.
No, and also because my face is the way it is, like I feel like sometimes people are like, she won't care, and I'm like, I care. I would like it to still be efficient. I know it looks like I don't ever get angry, but it can. This round face can get very angry if it tries. So that's my main roast. What is your toast and roast for this week?
I will toast to competence, I guess. Okay. I guess here's what's going on.
Full circle.
Yeah. My work supervisor is off to new projects. And he came into our organization and amazingly inspirational. It's always great when and it's really hard to find are just those people that are like really inspirational, that you're going to take their qualities, that you're going to take their methods for the rest of your career. And it's been great. It's been great working under him. And I don't know, sometimes like most people are okay. And a few people are, duds, but when you get someone really great, it's worth a lot. It's definitely worth a lot. So I'm toasting that. And because I'm toasting that, I don't really have any roasts, but we did get, in lieu of a roast, a little bit of listener mail about another vote for Demon Slayers. Apparently it is pretty good. So, yeah. But yeah, that'll be it for me. Now we get to toast pretty much a ton of incompetence with our talk on Fawlty Towers.
That's right.
That's where we come back in and we talk about Fawlty Towers. And I'm going to let you take this one away because you know the show pretty well, don't you?
I do. This is one I watched as a kid. It was part of I don't think it was very intentional, but I kind of did like comedy of the decades as a child. I think my parents didn't love like children's shows, so they were just like, we'll just have you guys watch older shows that we
one way to deal with that.
That are like, not going to be explicit or profane in any way. You'll just have lots of dry humor that no one will understand until you're an adult. So Fawlty Towers. This is obviously a comedy. It is about John Cleese stars as Basil Fawlty, the manic and much put upon hotel manager whose life is plagued by dead guests, hotel inspectors, and riffraff. And this is the official logline from Netflix. Series creators are John Cleese and Connie Booth, who were married at the time of the show being created. They parted ways after season 2. And then the main cast as follows is John Cleese as Basil Fawlty, Prunella Scales as Sybil Fawlty, Andrew Sachs as Manuel, Connie Booth as Polly Sherman, and Ballard Brickley as Major Gunn. It aired from 1975 to 1979. It has 2 seasons, or as they would say in the UK, they had 2 series and 12 episodes. You can currently watch it on BritBox and BBC, and also, there are some definitely YouTube episodes that you could find if you were in a pinch, you know. So it's out on the internet for you to enjoy. So, yeah. So Fawlty Towers is definitely a show. And I think a lot of our discussion will be around this before we go into our favorite episodes and moments. It is one that has impacted subsequent shows in the US and UK. So I think if you are a big fan of workplace comedies, this is kind of one of the first of its kind. And even shows like The Office, the British version, has like in their first episode, they pretty much do a homage to Basil Fawlty for a very memorable episode that we'll get into later. But yeah, and even there have been shows made like from a list from Met TV of 11 vintage American sitcoms that were inspired by British series. There is a claim that Cheers was heavily inspired by Fawlty Towers, and it was originally supposed to take place at an inn, and then they switched it to be a bar. It became its own entity, which is
Good.
what you want something to
That's
do.
exactly how things should be. That's exactly how inspiration works. Good for Cheers.
Yeah. And John Cleese even goes to star in a season 5 episode. So that's kind of a
Oh,
wink
that's awesome.
to people who like TV facts without it being too much of a on the nose. That being said, we've obviously seen things like The Office, where the American version is very similar to the UK version with cast, but again, it becomes its own show because it's still very different and has a different energy from the original. So, getting back into it, it's just, I don't know. I feel like we're talking here on a Monday night, and Fawlty Towers is kind of like a show where every episode is they're all having a case of the Mondays in this inn. And there's definitely probably been situations where you'd love to handle a work dispute the way Basil Fawlty does, but if you did, you probably wouldn't be staying at wherever you're working for that long, because his trademark is definitely flying off the handle and mouthing off sarcastically to guests, inspectors, guests, and inspectors. It's funny because they happen more than once. So yeah, Daniel, what's your history with this show, since I know you watched it for the first time for this episode?
I probably knew this existed. I knew John Cleese existed. He's the emotional crux of the 2004 film Shrek 2, but
Ooh.
I don't know him apart. Like, Monty Python was on at Friends' house, and I'm pretty sure I pieced the entire movie together just by going over enough times. With that said, yeah, I had never really thought that the first sort of workplace comedy that would have inspired the British versions of The Office and other workplace comedies to come would be this show. Would be a little show about a little inn. So this is really my first week with the show. Now, that said, this is a pretty fun show to study.
Yeah.
Despite the fact, and your parents, I think to their point, it's a very loud, very physical show. So there's a lot to sort of ingest, even if you're not catching all the wit.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is one that's like really fun behind the scenes.
Yes.
So like in the character of Basil Fawlty is like what really makes, I guess, it all like that's what a lot of the love towards this series comes from. Um, and it's so fun to hear the story of, I guess, that they were working on Monty Python, and they were having dinner at this hotel called what is it? Is it the Glen Eagle?
Yeah,
Uh,
Glen Eagles in Torquay, I think is how you say it. But yeah, it's in Devon, England.
and the hotel manager, who he's name dropped like a billion times in his career,
Yeah.
David Sinclair, was so insanely rude to them and so off-putting in all of their interactions during their time at this hotel, that they ended up making quite a bit of their career based off this guy, which
Yeah.
is kind of fantastic. That's classic sort of writing, right? Is just the finding, observing a character in real life. And as I understand it, they brought that character to the screen uh, with an episode of another uh, like sitcom that John Cleese was writing for. And one of the execs, apparently the character played him so well, and he was written so well on the one-off that he was on, whatever show he was on. I forget the name of it. I guess a network exec told John Cleese, like, "Hey, there's a series in that character." And eventually, Connie Booth and John Cleese wrote the series to it. Um, but yeah, I don't know. The character of Basil Fawlty and his rage building up to a climax every single episode of him trying to manage this little inn, um, and finding everyone around him incompetent in his own incompetence, is a delight. And it's a delight to see that it's from such a fun experience that these people actually had, and that this character, that this person, was able to sort of affect them so much that they shared him with the world, and now we all love him.
It seems like a really good outlet for, instead of being, kind of like my roast of the week, frustrated and just being like, "Ah, this is, how are people like this?" What if you just like wrote a script and it got picked up?
Right?
And you just like embodied these kind of, people who are theatrical in real life kind of characters, even if they're negative. And then it's you kind of, I guess obviously if you're at like this person's rank of, comedian, writer, etc., you're able to just take that even higher. You're like, I can just be him. Like, I
Yeah.
can just channel that specific person and just put them in all sorts of, you know, both larger than life, but very realistic situations. It's one of those kind of similar to like Seinfeld, where you do think like, oh, does this happen to people all the time? But then it does.
It does.
And
It's
it's,
a
and
bit
that's
of
like the thing
perspective,
where
but
it's
it
like,
does.
people have been to hotels with a rat that's present. And, they even have shows or like movies like the movie Chef, where it's all about, the kitchen freaking out and setting up a meal for the food critic that's always, under some sort of disguise. And that's kind of how he's trying to figure out in the hotel inspector episode of like, who's here is like the actual hotel inspector, and do I have to just cater to anyone who's like extra, picky and particular for today? And, I,
I okay, so we're talking about the hotel inspector episode.
all
This
right,
one's one of my
let's get
favorites.
into it.
This one, and it's good context too for the Basil character, because
It
there's a
is.
lot of motivation in the only people that this person is remotely respectful towards are the people with any sort of power above him, that has power over his establishment, over his miserable life that he can't escape, nor does he seem to want to. Uh,
No.
Seeing that those are the only people that he'll really sort of like buck and be a professional manager towards, all while he's particularly like in watching him fume, while he's basically annoyed at every interaction he's having, And as the sort of the dining hall or the restaurant in the hotel, everything is always going wrong between everybody, always ordering there. But in this particular one, he has a little more restraint, and seeing that because he believes all these people are wrongly, turns out none of them are, but hotel inspectors, is pretty hilarious and pretty telling. Um,
Yeah, the best moment I think is towards the end where he realizes two of the most kind of like over the top needy customers were both not the inspectors, and one of them who was maybe a little bit more pulled in, he kind of let him go. And then the guy who was like, asking to have all these, special, like, I won't eat anything that's not fresh. So, oh, were the peas frozen in this? Then I can't have it. I'll just have a cheese salad. And he's like, what do you mean? Like, just give me fresh cheese. And he's asking to like, can I reserve the TV at this hour to play this like bird sitcom or not bird sitcom, bird documentary on the BBC? And you're just like, like this person, it's definitely something where you're like, they've overheard this conversation happening. And we're like, we got to put that in an episode. But then they end it with a very slapstick comedy move where the guy who has made all these outrageous requests is about to leave, and he takes like 3 cream pies and just pies him in the face, the stomach, and the back. And then as he goes in to check in these 3 people, he's like, yeah, how are you doing? And then he just kind of like realizes all of a sudden that moments after he'd pied this guest, that these 3 people who are looking at him are definitely the actual hotel inspectors. And he just does a guttural scream as he's just like, how are you doing? Ah! So yeah, those moments are funny because you can kind of see the influences of, Monty Python is known for a lot of just kind of like classic, slapstick comedy of just, and taking kind of, nods from older TV, because like the pie in your face is very like, Three Stooges type deal. So I think that they do a good mix of doing these kind of like, would someone actually do that? And then mixing it in with the good humanistic reaction of like, oh my gosh, I just did that and now I'm in trouble. They don't really have too many consequences come in, but it's also like when you think about hotels too, and it takes a lot, even, I think, because hotels are there because you'll need to stay sometimes if you're just like, especially in like the countryside, like there's not too many to choose from. So I think they're able to kind of have enough of these scenarios and still keep their doors open. At least that's what we're told to believe in the Fawlty Towers series. So yeah, the Hotel Inspectors is a great one to watch from season 1. It's definitely one we would recommend. Another one that I'll recommend, and the other thing about the Hotel Inspector that I think is kind of funny too, is if you're someone who likes Gordon Ramsay's kitchen nightmares, it's kind of like you're on the side of the kitchen.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it.
So you're just like watching everything unravel in the background and them trying to keep it together and not get in trouble, which happens multiple times because there's always someone here to kind of be like, it's funny because they're all supposed to be adults, but in this show, they're definitely acting like, how are we not getting in trouble today by someone, whether it be the customer or an authority figure? Because it's true. It does seem like Basil obviously is not a fan of authority figures, but then he's like very worried about, anything actually happening to the inn. So then he'll kind of switch gears and put on a good face when there's someone there to catch him.
I
So
love.
yeah.
Sorry, I love all the times that like him and Polly, Basil and Polly, are at odds, and yet they have to
Yes.
come together all the time. And especially in the Hotel Inspector episode, where Basil yells for the guy to shut up, and he kind of talks back, or the guy kind of talks back to Basil, like, "What did you just say?" And him and Polly have to sort of like do a little bit, a little physical, like who are we talking to bit, that gets this customer on their side and gets them to start blaming the chef for the problems and whatnot. And it's definitely one of those kind of fun, like everybody in this hotel is pitted against each other until they're forced
Oh
to
yeah.
join forces based on some ridiculous happening.
Yeah.
It's especially fun with characters like Polly and Manuel.
Oh
So
yeah. They're great. And another one that's fun is gourmet night. So gourmet night is supposed to be that it's kind of like these people keep coming in and complaining about the food. So they're like, we'll do a night where we make like really nice food. But what's funny is like the hotel is clearly like not equipped to make really fancy food. So they'll have things where like Polly will bring someone something and they'll be like, this is great. She's like, don't tell anyone about it. We can only make one. And then there's like a kid that was seated at the table and complaining that like none of the chips are good and he really needs salad cream, which is I think like similar to a ranch dressing type situation. And like it's I think kind of relatable at this point of my life. But like this kid is being like super rude to Basil, and obviously he is not having it with like a kid who's being overly mouthy of like all the food here is shit. and and you do like watch him kind of talk back and get at this kid's level and go, yeah, it's pretty bad when you see that happen in real life because no one can really do anything and you just kind of sit and go like, we feel bad for the waiter that the kid's being mean to him. But it obviously on Fawlty Towers they hype it up and go, oh no, this kid is going to like have a full-on argument with Basil and have no fear. And then the mom kind of is like, well, what kind of establishment doesn't have salad cream? And they just go in on it. And it's definitely another one of those episodes where, yeah, the staff is always at odds with each other until the guests start attacking the staff. And then they're like, ah, now we must team up. But weirdly enough, and I don't know if this happens in a lot of shows, but my favorite episode is actually the last episode of the entire series, which is Basil and the Rat. So for this one, that kind of wraps up a lot of where the show is going. And after we chat about this episode, we can talk about some fun facts as well as some other episodes. But just since it's like the final episode, you do get a lot out of it. But basically, Basil and the Rat is that Manuel allegedly has this pet Siberian hamster that is a white rat that he keeps in the kitchen. And that just so happens when this, friendly pet is revealed, that is also the health inspector coming to inspect the hotel. So, Daniel, how did you feel about this episode watching it for the first time?
It's a great one to end on. This is one of those episodes where, and they knew it was ending. They only wrote 6 episodes for each series here, and so they definitely knew that this was going to be the last produced one. There are a lot of fun facts about this episode in particular, and the second series. This is also the only episode to have a pre-recorded scene, due to the rat. But so they have an actual rat running around the stage with them. But something that does make this a somewhat special episode is that John Cleese sort of describes it as this big ensemble effort. And it really is. It's really encompassing of absolutely everybody in the main cast at this point. At which point, there's kind of 2 new people here in season 2. There's this Major, though I guess he's in season 1, but they keep him around pretty consistently in season 2. I wasn't expecting to see him so often. He's just kind of this drunk, abrasive, foolish man. And then there's a chef character that they also bring in. And as this sort of rat's coming around, as they're trying to chase this rat around and find him, because Manuel is so loving to the rat. And it's wonderful that this episode's that Manuel is so, I guess, not present, but Not active. There's a word. He has a lot of agency in this episode, and it's really great that
Yeah,
like the first half is him trying to essentially save his rat, and the second half is the entire staff trying to find the rat, because in Manuel, who is somewhat a punching bag for Basil's character, or what Basil kind of takes a lot of his frustrations out on, as Manuel
definitely.
is sort of inexpensive as far as employees go. Though everybody is, he's a
Yeah,
very compassionate character who is somewhat bad at his job. And there is a bit of a language barrier that they play with, but to be honest, what's funny, and this was actually one of my favorite lines, and I'm not sure if that, I don't believe it's in this episode, but Polly, one of the other hotel employees, at one point Basil asks, "What do we pay you for?" And she goes, "For the staying like power. Like basically, you're paying me because I'm the only person who's going to stick around. Like we are the employees that you have." So you have this character like Manuel who's really compassionate, but ultimately gets them, they don't work well together, and so there's a lot of trouble there, and there's a lot of fun there. And so seeing him trying to save this rat and everybody else running around, trying to find it while they're trying to keep it from the health inspector and other guests and whatnot. It is sort of a fun way to keep everybody involved. Even the major plays a
yeah.
you know sorry for the word major role in the final scene where they present a box of biscuits to the health inspector, and the rat is revealed to him. It's a fun episode. It's a really fun episode. And I'm happy that it does give everybody its due. But I thought Manuel was. It's interesting because he's introduced like a scene or two later than everybody else. And around the time he was introduced, I was like, are they going to use Manuel a lot in the finale? And they do, absolutely. So
Yeah, and didn't this finale air like a long time after the rest of the season? Because I think BBC was having a strike.
yeah, there was a strike that happened right before production. There are all sorts of like weird stories here. Series 2 airs like 4 years after the first one, and I couldn't
Man,
imagine like watching a series, waiting 4 years, and then waiting 6 more months for the finale. When there's only like 5 weeks before that of show. It's really interesting. But yeah, a strike did delay the production, and I think it forced a casting change at some point. Though that's all detailed out in this amazing documentary that was like made for broadcast on BBC, and it was called
ooh,
"Fawlty Towers Reopened." It's about an hour 15, and it's found on YouTube, and it is where I've gotten a lot of the knowledge that I have of the behind workings of this series. Uh, and it's well told through the entire production team about the series and whatnot, and they're very fond of this episode as well. Tracy, you said this was your
yes.
favorite episode.
This is my favorite episode. I like, and for similar reasons. I know that, you know, creators have listed it because it's like the best example of the ensemble working together. And I think that's true. As we've noted, looking at previous episodes, they're at odds until they have a common enemy, basically. And in this episode, it's a rat. And I think that just like heightens the humor even more. They're trying to kind of evade the health inspector who could actually shut them down. I think it works really well as a series finale too because of that, because it's clearly kind of like they found that the health inspector sees the rat. So you're kind of going as the assumption as the viewer of like, well, now this hotel's probably getting shut down, or at least shut down for some time.
Right.
So it works on both, kind of like literal and bigger narrative levels. And yeah, that's like the main thing I really like about that episode. It just does seem to wrap up the whole series really well because in the first season you have the overall hotel inspectors that mostly just see, people acting immature. But and you do see in that first season that it's really more following Basil with the hotel inspectors more and how he's handling each situation and kind of getting frustrated with everyone. And in this one, you're really seeing them all come together and they're all kind of at that same level of frustration. So it is kind of, and you have to think about that and go like, is it great that they've all taken on the Basil persona in Crisis? hard to say. But it's fun seeing that progression of they're all really invested at that point. Because I think before it's true, it's kind of like the quote you said from Polly. It's like a lot of them do kind of go throughout their day. And the reason why the show is funny is they're kind of dejected and not devoted.
Yes.
And that's what's really fun is that you're just seeing people who are like, I don't want to be here, is like their main attitude.
Yeah.
And they work in
There's
hospitality. It's the very much they're working on that oxymoron of like the most inhospitable hospitality staff.
right. No, there's this real honesty here where it's like if you took this hotel away from these people, they'd all live far happier lives. It's amazing. It's I don't know. I've seen those. Like everybody's seen those environments. It's what makes
Yes.
the show great. Is that kind of honesty? Is that kind of like wow, this is these people together at their worst, absolutely at their worst, and which is also kind of makes it compelling when they have to work together
Yeah.
at their worst to overcome things.
Yeah. You definitely get that same feel that you get from a lot of dry comedies that you see made later on of when you relate to the characters on the show, you're not being your best version of yourself. And but at the same time, that's why it's an authentic show, is because everyone has those thoughts in those days where they're just like, I do not want to deal with this. I would like to take the low road. And that's, that's where Basil only takes the low road. There's no way where he just lets anything go. It's always like, I have to have the last word. I have to, duke it out with whoever. So yeah, that's why the show is very comforting in a way, even though you're like, it's not comforting in the way that I would think about this is a hotel I'd want to stay at.
No, not at all.
Is this the hotel you want to check out? But yeah, it's the show has made more recent news with the episode of The Germans, which is another very edgy episode of comedy. It's weirdly listed on a lot of like directors and creators' favorite episodes of television, but it does rightfully have a caveat for using a bit of offensive and dated material. But basically, it goes through Basil having German guests and him having a concussion and then making many World War II references at their expense. And you can watch the episode to see it go through. But yeah, it mostly was a topic of discussion because BBC wasn't sure if, like other streaming platforms like HBO Max and Netflix, if they should take certain episodes off that they weren't sure if viewers, could get the wrong idea from. They took it off initially. John Cleese really made his very worded, not sugar-coated plea for why he thinks it should stay. I think they compromised at it by putting a preface at the beginning that there's kind of like explicit and, potentially kind of offensive. I'm not sure of the exact wording content that you might see. I think when we were thinking about it before, it was similar to how they've kind of done a preface on certain shows like Looney Tunes or other things that have also kind of done these like characterizations of political or wartime figures that are, you know, have done some bad evil stuff,
Right.
and they want people to realize that they're making fun of, dictators and horrible people and not glorifying them. And so they just want to make sure that, people get the correct idea that it's like we're making fun of this, not making, a spotlight on it, is I think the best way to word this. But yeah, it got a lot of heat because of that. And then I think the BBC made a resolution on how to frame how that episode is presented, but it's
I
it
think
is a pretty memorable episode from the series, no matter where you look at it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It is memorable. It's one, and through all of this, we're not even talking about the amazing segment about the fire alarm versus the
Yes.
burglar alarm while they line up all of the guests to try to do a drill about it. Yeah, definitely. Like the file got pulled down. They put a disclaimer. Obviously, like when you're making fun of someone who, you know, obviously they're making fun of the people saying the bad things, but because it was made in 1975, they're using language that we have done away with. So
Yes.
that the screen that airs right at the top of the episode that tells you to brace for it. That's totally fine. Um, but yeah, it's a fun zany episode, and it's a little wild, and
Yeah.
it's
It
definitely
was
something
pushing the
that
envelope then, it pushes the envelope now.
yeah, you're
It
not going to see
is
it in a remix.
definitely showing how, you know, outrageous the writing and this cast can be.
Yes,
And, you're getting all of that. And it is good to contextualize that it was in 1975. So they're making fun of things that, in a way, in that time period that it was still edgy then, but they also, yeah, I think throughout this show, if you are watching Faulty Towers, they do definitely have, since it's an older show, references and verbiage that would not fly now.
right. Our
That's
the way we navigate conversations with certain older family members or grandparents. Just imagine the way that they were navigating conversations with their older family members.
exactly.
Those are the characters that you have air in this episode.
Yes.
Yeah, but otherwise, it's a pretty fantastic, loud romp of an episode, really.
Yeah. It shows the brashness of this show, which is
Yes.
which is a big part of the character of this sitcom, is kind of like they're always going to go to the extreme. They're always going to say the worst thing at the worst possible moment and make their guests feel as unwelcome as possible.
Yeah.
with the exception of, the major that just decides to be a long-term guest, and you're like, I guess you're just very into this environment. There's certain episodes and that where they have like the thing where they find like the dead body in one of the rooms. And that's actually a premise that comes on Schitt's Creek later, where they're running the motel and they're like, someone hasn't checked out, and then they inspect the room and it's a very older person who had died in their sleep. And you do look at how like Schitt's Creek is mostly about the entire town and the family and not so much about the motel. But if they made a show about the motel, it does play a similar energy to Fawlty Towers. That being said, Schitt's Creek's very smart and very, like, I would say, more progressive
Right.
in its writing, and Fawlty Towers is almost like, I wouldn't say the opposite, but it's just like a very different tone. So you're just getting like different ways to kind of do the lower budget hotel experience, because when you're looking at the Fawlty Towers, you're not thinking like people are coming here for a luxury stay. It
No.
definitely seems like, you know, the kind of hotel that maybe has like a Denny's attached to it or something. And if it was in the US. So, yeah, it's a really good time. I think a lot of the fun facts are behind the scenes, like the fact that, we've mentioned before, it's based on this Glen Eagles hotel in Torquay where John Cleese stayed at while filming Monty Python's Flying Circus. And yeah, the hotel owner, Donald Sinclair, he's used as his name for an eccentric billionaire character, if you've ever seen the movie Rat Race as well. So he was really attached to this. This
It did
person
a lot for
really
his
made a
career.
huge impact on his life, where he's like, I'm just gonna make this guy like into so many characters throughout my career. And yeah, it said that each script took 6 weeks to write, 5 days to rehearse, and one evening to record in the studio in front of a live audience, which is a pretty quick turnaround time when you think about it. So, that being said, there were 4 years in between those. So maybe those
Right.
weeks were pretty intense. Yeah, and a lot of these facts I am getting from the IMDb trivia section. We will include all of the links in the show notes. But yeah, even as the series progressed, one of the kind of Easter eggs you can look out for in the beginning is that the letters for Fawlty Towers will be rearranged and misspelled. So some of the variations you might see are watery fowls, farty tower, flay otters, fatty owls, warty towels, flowery twats, and farty towels. So lots of gross out humor for there. And yeah, they were apparently, according to this trivia, production team member supplied the hotel sign anagrams supposedly left by aggrieved paperboys. Yeah. And so
Makes
they
sense.
have, yeah,
That's who Basil would be fighting. Absolutely.
yeah. So yeah, it's fun to see how this show has, really in a way, I wouldn't say it stood the test of time because yeah, there have been definitely critiques of some of the mentions within the episodes, but it is one that really started something for workplace comedies, definitely of the dysfunctional nature, and how those became such a special place in our streaming platforms. Because I have to say, I think if you look at a lot of the shows we watch now, it's you're looking at a lot this kind of character setup and these kind of situations where you're like, this stuff keeps happening again and again. I even think about shows like Superstore, where, each episode is kind of something catastrophic has happened in the store. And as much as, people are kind of like, how does it always go to this extremes every time something like this happens? And I kind of find myself going like, maybe not externally, but internally, I think it does. So I think it's very cathartic to watch Basil kind of like have these outbursts that everyone would kind of like to have when they're being slighted in some way. But, you're mature enough to know that you can't always do that in every situation. I think that part's fun. I think if you're looking at, yeah, the way he interacts with Polly and kind of how she shuts him down sometimes, you're like, that's pretty fun. And knowing their dynamic in real life. And then, yeah, Connie's character, some of the comments they make between the two, you are kind of like, ooh, that the, those are some harsh words between the both of you. But I also like that regardless of what kind of like snafu they've had argument wise, she usually just kind of like gets on the phone, cigarette in hand, and it's just like, nah. Like she what's funny is like she seems kind of the opposite, where she really can't be bothered by all of the fires going on in the hotel. And he's the one where it's just like, one toe is out of line and he's unraveled. So you're just seeing kind of that. Like, I think it's kind of cool too, because if you're thinking of the time period of the 70s, you're watching this guy who's very much playing the hysterical character, and you're seeing a woman who always keeps her cool. And that was always kind of like a sexist trope that was played in other sitcoms, and you're watching that be flipped on theirs. So I like seeing that too for like a interesting. I wonder if that was intentional or just one of those, like, since this whole show is based on a real life hotel and
It
their staff, you're like, maybe that's just how they were. Maybe we're overthinking it by reading into it.
I don't think so. I was watching that documentary, and there's actually a lot about that. There's a lot about how
Oh,
John
wow.
Cleese was writing Basil and Manuel, and Connie was writing Sybil and Polly. And there's actually a good amount of that documentary that gets into Basil and Sybil's marriage and what it
Wow.
means that they live in twin beds next to each other, and like the sexless life of Basil, and like why Sybil's sticking around. And they really do dive into all of that and
Interesting.
like what's behind it. And it's actually one of the more interesting parts of the documentary. Definitely, something I definitely recommend if anyone's at all interested in Fawlty Towers and wants to hear more. Like this is, it is really great, and it does shed a lot of light. And
Yeah.
that's it's really fun when it gets into that. There's also I want to mention this is like
Yeah.
another thing about like Basil and his short bursts is there's this the line that sold me on the show very early on, and it's in somewhere in the second or third episode, is there's something happening at the front desk, and Basil turns to, I forget who, But he very not very calmly, but he's fuming down inside. But he says, I was in the Korean War. I've killed 4 people. And that was where I was like, all right, this explains a lot of behavior that you see in this show. And yeah, I don't know. That was the line that sold me on the character.
It's kind of giving you that Red Foreman moment.
Yeah.
where it's like he takes his wartime and be like, I've done this before, or you wouldn't know. And yeah.
Yeah, and it explains why he's able to sort of like be able to calmly speak to the Major, and tolerate him in a way that he doesn't always all the other characters. There is a really interesting there are interesting dynamics. There are really honest dynamics throughout this series. It's really well written.
And I also read that they added the chef on as a character because they felt while watching the show that the hotel seemed short-staffed, which when you watch it, you are getting the feeling.
Well, no, it is
short-staffed. And you kind of thought that was the point. Like, aren't they supposed to, isn't like, the reason all of these problems are happening?
Again,
short-staffed.
In the Germans episode, Polly asks, when she's supposed to go upstairs and file everyone down for the fire drill, she asks, well, I'm only here during meal hours. Who does this when I'm not here? And Basil's like, we'll figure that out if that happens. Like, we don't need to panic. What they do?
They just never have a backup plan or are organized, which is why it's so easy to take a thread and completely, unravel any sort of structure that they have, which is what happens every episode. Someone is able to pick out a thread just by, ordering a different dish that they're like, but no one orders that. Or, asking for a specific wine, or just one little detail just kind of sets them all off so easily. And that's what's really fun. I think that's a very unique aspect of this show, is that the actual show and the making of the show are almost equally entertaining. If you're someone who really likes the making of shows, I mean, obviously the actual show is really great writing and entertaining more so in that way. But the kind of fun facts behind each one, if you're, and I think if you're listening to this show, you are probably a TV nerd like we are. It's pretty fun. It's pretty fun seeing kind of like how each episodes came to be. It's also, I think, the fact that it really did come from this actual experience they had and became so much bigger than just being annoyed at your hotel stay. Instead of writing a Yelp review, write a sitcom.
Please. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's our kind of pitch for you guys to rewatch Fawlty Towers where you can, because it's one show where when you watch it, I feel like you can understand other shows really well. And also, if, similar to watching, animes and wanting to get that movie afterwards to just kind of stay in that world longer. I think that's kind of like the documentary for this show works well like that too. It's kind of the like, you're like, I kind of need a little bit more from this from this era. You can get your fix that way too. And it's kind of probably similar if you're a huge Monty Python fan. You're like, I want to see a little bit more John Cleese. It's like, well, here you have it. You have him in this. And then he goes on to make a lot more stuff.
And I can attest, if you have not cashed in your BritBox 7-day trial on Prime Video, series is only 12 episodes, and you can definitely do that within that amount of time. That's Fawlty Towers.
Yeah.
And that's Primetime Party Time. Where can you find us? You can find us here at ptptshow.com Monday nights at 9 p.m. Thank you for joining us. This show couldn't have been made without the following amazing people. We're talking our artwork was done by Fen. Find her at FenLatte on Instagram. Our theme song was done by Jwright. Find him at jwrightmusic.com. Website, thanks to Coco. You can find previous episodes of us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen to our podcasts. Hit us up by sending us an email at info@ptbtshow.com, on our voicemail on our homepage, chat box on the homepage. If you want to rant, roast, and rave, we are here. You cannot visit the Fawlty Towers set hotel. It burned down in the early 90s. But if you're looking for a Fawlty Towers-esque experience in NoHo, there's a fish and chips place that I won't tell you about because I'm embarrassed that I've actually gone there. But it is the full experience, complete with some great Yelp reviews like Pray I Make It Through the Night. That's prime time, party time, Fawlty Towers.
So now we're on a different kind of cliffhanger of where is this fish and chips establishment?
I'll never tell.
We're all so curious now.
That's yeah, no, that's a place. That's a place. Where's the fish and chips place? It's relevant to the episode.